Okay, after mentioning it several times, it's finally time to do the flip through of the core rulebook of Pathfinder. Now, Pathfinder uses pretty much like the same D20 system that the third edition does. So, if you're familiar with third edition, you pretty much will be able to quickly and easily get into this. So the setup is pretty much the same type of concept as other core rulebooks. So it has like an introductory, and then it pretty much goes right into getting started. So pretty much has a quick overview on how to use this book for a few pages, and then like a like pretty much every core rule book, it gives like pretty much like a quick example of like how play actually works, so like have a quick good idea of like how things flow, especially how combat flows as well. And so then it pretty much gets right into like the character generation. So it's like the same kind of concept you would do like the character creation video I did like a while ago. So it talks about the ability scores, and like it also gives like tables like the ability score cost. This is like a different way to like actually do it. You get so many points to spend on abilities instead of rolling like your typical 3 6-sided dice or your 4 6-sided dice and discard the lowest number. So this is a different way of actually having to do it. So like you can see like the ability score points, you get so many points to spend on the abilities, and each ability will cost like a certain points. Like you can see here, like with 14, it'll cost like 5 points to get like a ability of 14. So if you're playing like a barbarian or something, you had like it would cost like 5 points to get like a strength of 14, which would be kind of low. But you can see like as they get up higher at points, like 18, a score of 18 would cost 17 points. So and they give like in a sense like the rating of points. So like if for instance you only get like 10 points for like a low fantasy up to like epic fantasy for 25 points to spend. So you might not I am not a fan of this because you don't necessarily get like characters that have like maybe like they're great at like one ability or something. So like I've never really been a fan of like this way, but like you could use that as instead of the like they said the 3d6 the 4d6 method of rolling for a character. So I'm usually a fan of like the 46 uh, for generating abilities. So it also does go into like the explanations of the abilities in case Pathfinder is the first time you've come across a tabletop role playing game, and in case you haven't come across D&D. So it does give the descriptions of the abilities, so that way you know like what's what and everything. So like it goes through the typical 6 abilities: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And so like it also gives like the ability score modifiers and bonuses and everything that you would be using for like skills that I'll get into a little later. So obviously then it starts off with like your races. It gets into like the typical chapter up for your races. So you have like your dwarves, your halflings, which are like kind of like your hobbits from Lord of the Rings, elves, humans, gnomes, half orcs, half elves. Those are usually the common ones, but like could quite possibly like build like other ones like Asmere tieflings are also popular ones. So like it also like now gets into the actual like descriptions of each race and gives like the traits and everything. So it gives them for each race they each have like certain abilities and everything. So when creating like a character, like for instance like here the dwarf character, you can see when writing it up, you'd get like with your abilities, you get the +2 to Constitution, +2 to Wisdom, and -2 to Charisma, and like they talk about like each of the different abilities that they have as a dwarf and area. If that's what you were play as a dwarf, and of course they also go do this through like every single like race that's in here. So they got the elf, they got the half elf, half orc, they got humans, they got the halflings. So it pretty much gives you the description of like the like in a sense racial abilities that you would use for each one that you would pick and everything. So then it goes into like the whole chapter on the typical classes that you would find. So you pretty much find like the typical character classes in it. So like the leveling system is kind of similar to third edition, with this being completely based off the D20 system of third edition. So you can see like how like you could do like different paces of leveling. So you could do like a slow level if you want to actually get more in depth like role playing. So that would be something like that. Whereas like if you're more like a dungeon crawl hack and slash, you probably might do like a fast leveling type of deal. So it all depends on what type of game that you're playing, and so like it depends on like you as the DM and the players that you're dealing with on how fast or slow you want to level up and everything. So it does start off with getting into multi-classing uh, briefly. So like multi-classing, what that is like for instance like right here, like you can see like it starts off with like the barbarian. So the way multi-classing works is like if you start off with a barbarian and ended up wanting to take say a level in fighter, you could multi-class into fighter. So for instance, starting off at level 1 barbarian, you could level up to level 2 as barbarian, or take a stay at level 1 as barbarian and level up to level 2, or I mean level 1 as a fighter. So you'd be a level 1 barbarian and a level 1 fighter instead of the level 2 barbarian. So that's pretty much the quick concept of how the multi-classing works. So like I said, it does have like a typical classes, and like it goes through like the actual class abilities that you have. So with that being like third edition, you have like a different 3 different types of saves: fortitude, reflex, and willpower. So fortitude is constitution based, so it's like it would be something like to be able to resist poisons. Reflex save would be something like to dodge like a someone shooting a bow and arrow at you, and you would use that to dodge that. And like willpower, like someone's trying to use magic to dominate your mind or something, you'd use a willpower saving throw. And so then it goes to like the class abilities that you would get each time you would level up. And like you can see here, like this is one for like the barbarian. So like it starts off with like level 1. You can see like they get fast movement and rage once per day. So like each time you level up, you get like a certain class ability. So like I said, it has the typical classes in this. So like you have like the bard, and you go through, and you can also like the cleric, flipping through like all the different domains of the cleric spells. So like, and then of course the druid. So like, of course spellcasters tend to go a little more in depth because they have like spells and everything. So like, and of course the spell lists are quite long for, especially for your arcane spellcasters. And there are cards that are out there that you can get, like spell cards, like boxes that have like all the lists of the spells that you can get, that I'll get into eventually. So you're not flipping through the book; you have handy dandy cards and everything. So that, like I said, I'll eventually be getting into. So like you can see like now we're going through like the fighter, the monk. Whenever I see I think about the monk, I always think of like Bruce Lee, but that's just me. So, and of course, like you got your paladin, and so like I said, like I'll reiterate, it pretty much has like your all your stereotypical classes in it. So like the only difference that I really can say that like this one is different than say fifth edition is it doesn't necessarily have like the warlock class, and it just has like this typical spellcasters of sorcerer and wizard. So that's like one difference between Pathfinder and fifth edition with classes. And then of course now we get into skills. So like the way like skills work is like in third edition, what you do is you have like your ability modifier. So like for instance like dexterity, for instance, like one of the skills you can see here, stealth, is based on dexterity. So you'd have like a dex modifier. So like for instance, like the rogue is trying to sneak through a dungeon, and he has like an 18 in his dexterity, which gives him a +4 modifier. And you take what you do is you end up taking ranks in like each class, so you get so many like skill points per level, and you start off with so many at the gate at first level. So like for instance, like it's the number of skill points you get is like based off your intelligence type of deal. So like you might say you get 4 plus your ability modifier times 4 is how many like ability in a sense points you get. So like for instance, if you had like a 6 or like a 14 intelligence, you get like a +2. So 4 plus 2 would be 6 times 4 would be like 24. So you get 24 points to spend between skills. So like you could, and there's sort of like a max rank you could get at like at each level. So like for instance, starting off at like level 1, you might have like a max rank of 4. So, for instance, like using stealth, that stealth as an example with the rogue, trying to kind of sneak through the dungeon, his dexterity is 18, which gives him a +4. He has 4 ranks in stealth, which would give him like a +4, so he would get an 8 uh, base. So, what you do is you roll your typical 20-sided dice, and based on the difficulty that the DM sets, like yeah, you'd have to beat that on a D20. So for instance, like if the DM said that you had to make like a difficulty class or DC of 15, you'd take 8 and roll a D20, and whatever you got on the D20, you'd add 8. So for instance, like if you rolled a 10 on the D20 and you add the 8 for your dexterity modifier plus your rank, so you get an 18, so you would pass the DC in sense. So that's how like a quick overview of how skills work. So in each class gets different skills, because like I said, the rogue might be good at sneaking, whereas the barbarian wouldn't necessarily be good at that, but he might be good at like using like a brawling skill, like a type of unarmed combat type of thing. If he took skills in that, of course, the monk would probably be someone that best in that. So, and like they also got like the knowledge skill, and like there's several different ones you can like like in a sense like sub abilities you could take. You could be like maybe knowledgeable in religion or nature, or like or if you're like a wizard arcana, which is like your spell casting type of knowledge. So like in a sense, like skills are something that like you could think of like every real day life skills that we pick up in life as well. So then with chapter 5, it gets into the feats, which again is like works similar to the third edition. So like each class has like in a sense the chance to get different types of like feats and everything. So like for instance, like a dodge is like one that you get. You can see here you get the +1 dodge bonus to AC, but you have to have like a DC dex of at least 13 to be able to get it. So someone like the rogue would pick up that, and it would since they don't tend to use armor, that would be like beneficial for them. But for someone like a wizard, that wouldn't necessarily be as useful, because like they may not necessarily engage in direct combat as much. So like they might be get more into like your like your meta magic, or like your feats that are right here. So like what those do is they kind of give like ability, like a not necessarily like as general as like a skill of your skills, but it gives abilities for your spells, like that's kind of specific to like a spell cast. And so like, and also like you can take an item creation. So like for instance, you're a cleric, you could take like an item creation of like a brew potion, where you could start brewing like potions of healing for your group. So that way you could, in a sense, not just have to use your spells as a cleric to heal people, you could also brew potions to help them heal. So there's a ton of different feats that like you can take that can like either help you like you can see like blind fight can help you with combat, or like the brew potion that I mentioned can help you brew potions, like the potion of healing that I mentioned. So like then this chapter not only gives a list of all the feats, but also goes into description of all the feats that they have in here. So like eventually I'll probably be picking up like more books for expansions for uh, Pathfinder, and I'm sure that they do have like books along the lines of like the Xanathar Guide to Everything, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and the other books, expansion rule books that I've picked up that I went through for D&D. So they might I might probably be eventually picking up more and going through those for Pathfinder that have like go into like further details of different classes, different feats, and gives you in a sense more options, just like those extended rule books that I've gone through before. So like I said, this whole chapter is on the feats, and it gives a list and description on each of the feats and everything. So then, like a typical book, it gets into the equipment that you can pick up and everything. So, like for instance, like all your weapons, it goes through like the starting goal that you can you start off with to be able to get like maybe like an initial equipment and everything. So like it goes through like a whole list of weapons that you can pick up. It also goes through like gives great pictures on like each of the weapons, so you kind of have an idea of like what they look like. So everyone loves their typical barbarian with their great axe. So then, of course, it also gets into your armor that you use, and of course, it also gives like nice pictures of like the different types of armor. So whether you're just using the typical padded armor, which is lightest you could use, to like the actual full plate, like your stereotypical knight in shining armor. And your like in this game, the paladin would be like the prime example of someone who'd use that. So, and then of course it also gets into like a lot of like the in a sense mundane stuff that you like instruments like the spyglass, shovel, stuff that you not necessarily use in combat, but equipment that you use in maybe in dungeoneering, going delving into dungeons. So it also gives stuff that you can like goods and services, like maybe you're going into town after like you do that typical dungeon crawl. You can buy like goods and services from the town folk and everything. So it gives descriptions on stuff like that as well for this equipment and everything. So, and of course then it gets into like additional rules, as you can see. So stuff like alignment, so like it gets into like the 9 different alignments, which is basically like a kind of quick easy overview on what type of character you are. So like usually like the villains are like people that are chaotic evil, and like your paladin, typical paladin that I've mentioned would be like someone who would be lawful good, someone who upholds the law and upholds good and everything, and they have like pretty much like everything in between type of deal. So these additional rules get into stuff like that as well, and gets into like the vital statistics of like of characters. So it gives like the aging, which a lot of times doesn't necessarily carry too much weight in D&D, because you're like your campaigns over campaign time might last decades. In game time they might last only like a few years, even though in real time they might last several years. And of course a coworker recently mentioned like a game that's been running for 40 years, so like you could in a sense be running a campaign for decades. So I'll probably eventually be getting into that video pretty soon with having today off. So, and it gives movement ideas for like when you're traveling. Say you're traveling through like the desert, it gives you like ideas on like how fast you can move through like the terrain. So this is the additional rules, kind of like that work outside of combat. And of course, then the next chapter 8 is all about combat, which gives you the all the ideas and information that you need to be able to run combat and everything. So like it talks about the attack roll, attack bonuses. It talks about damage. It gives a little table right here about size modifier that like will depending on your size, whether you're a small size like halfling, medium size like your typical human, elf, or dwarf, or if you're kind of like large or huge like your giants and everything. So it does give like descriptions and like pictures and like how you could set up like with miniatures and everything. So miniatures is yet another thing I'll be getting into, even though like those aren't necessarily required, because you could just use little pennies and dimes and nickels and stuff that you have like loose change around your house as like a instance as miniatures. So and then it goes into further into like the actual stuff that you can do like with actions. So like, you can it talks about like how you can do a full attack charge, or like you can maybe like move, attack, and then move, or attack, move, or it gets into like all the different types of things that you can do while in combat and everything. So like and it pretty much is like goes in depth on that. Like also, like I said, move in like before you attack. Say like someone's like 10 feet away, you can to attack. So like you attack a goblin that's 10 feet away, you'd move towards them, attack, and then you can maybe quite possibly move on to the next one type of deal. Or you could pull out like a crossbow or a bow and attack them and then move. Or it depends on how like the action that you decide to do. So this chapter pretty much goes in depth on how to run combat. Also, it gives you like how to deal with like healing and like in a sense like temporary hit points. Someone casts a spell that gives you like an extra 20 hit points, and that lasts only for a certain amount of time. So it gets into that, and of course it also gets into like a quick like tactical movement, like it shows here like terrain and stuff that you can getting back to the miniatures. You can sit there and use miniatures and like terrain like this. Now you don't necessarily would need to I'll use the pennies, dimes, and nickels example again. You could also just use like graph paper as well. So like you could in a sense get real cheap and use that instead of the miniatures and the tiles and stuff. Now if you're like really into it, you're eventually probably going to get stuff like that. So it continues on with like the special movement rules and everything. So like sometimes like your movement might be obscured, so it might has rules where to cover like a kind of like in a sense like not your usual, your kind of like extraordinary movement rules type of deal. So again, this like gives you the kind of like the whole chapter, an overview on how combat works. So it really helps. And of course, any fantasy game wouldn't be complete without magic. And of course, this whole chapter goes into the actual in depth of like using magic and like how to like instance like right here, talk about how to combine it. And of course, it gives like the whole list of spells and like the whole description of each and every spell. So like this tends to be like one of the like any fantasy role playing game. Like it tends to have like a huge chapter on magic, because like or at least maybe 2 chapters. Now I stand corrected on magic, because like that chapter 9 is all about the magic, and then of course chapter 10 here is like what I was getting to, was that you actually have like a whole list of spells. So, like for instance, it starts off with like the classes that what spells they can use. And of course, like you got your arcane and divine spellcasters. So bard and paladin are ones that like a lower level type of spellcasters, and cleric, druid, sorcerer, and wizard tend to be your bigger spellcasters, because that's what they tend to focus on. So it starts off, like I said, giving example lists of what spells the classes can use, and it gives like a whole quick overview of the spells per level. And then of course like it wouldn't be like any good if you didn't have actual descriptions of the spells. So like it pretty much goes through the whole list of spells, giving them descriptions. So, and I mentioned that you could get cards, so like you could that I'll eventually be getting into. So you don't have to necessarily do all this flipping through to try to find your spell. So like because that cards, well, may be optional they can be beneficial. So like I'll eventually get into like that as well. So then we get into like prestige classes, like flipping back, that gets into like different types of like classes that like you could in a sense like multi-class that I mentioned a little while ago. So like for instance like if you're familiar with third edition, you'll probably recognize these, but like if not, these are kind of like classes that you can take that aren't like your normal classes, like barbarian, rogue, wizard, or cleric. There's different types of classes that you could take that kind of could in a sense become further develop your character. So like the arcane archer would be someone who kind of like melds archery with magic and everything. So you could in a sense like start shooting like ice arrows and or maybe fire arrows, that type of deal. So you also got the arcane trickster, which is a kind of like a melds the rogue with the arcane classes. And of course you got like your assassin. And one that pops to mind for me is Artemis Entreri from Forgotten Realms. He's kind of like the adversary to Drustu Arden. So he's the first one that kind of pops to mind when it comes to like the assassin class. So like and like a dragon disciple. I think of like the the Dragonborn race from fifth edition type of deal when I think of this class. So but it's a class that where you can maybe like start going down the path of like start introducing maybe dragons or something. Like the duelist is like a think of your stereotypical swashbuckler type of deal, like Three Musketeers, and lore master is like a geared more towards like your spellcasters, like someone who kind of focuses on like a specific lore, like maybe a specific school of magic type of deal. So these prestige classes, like I said, are kind of like not your ordinary classes, but like you can multi-class into, and like to kind of like further your game and further develop your characters. So like and give you more options on the like different types of like classes you could play. So just like the player's handbook in fifth edition, yeah, it gives you like a whole chapter on how to like be a dungeon master, or as they say here, a game master. So you don't necessarily have to pick up like the DM guide, or in this case, the GM guide. It gives you a whole chapter on just on how to GM. So now, while this does give you a quick and easy overview to for a GM, so you could in a sense get away with just this book as a DM, or as the Pathfinder here calls it, the GM. So those two kind of like are interchangeable. So I tend to say DM because I'm used to like having played D&D for for over like for probably 30 years now, off and on. So then like it gets into also on a chapter on the environment, because like you could have like come up with different things like with mentions here with walls. It could be raining, and like it could in a sense like or it could be completely dry. So like it gets into like all sorts of things that you might like encounter in your environment that like could help like in case like there's something that's out of ordinary. It gives you like a whole in a sense chapter on how to deal with like and ordinary stuff that does pop up throughout the game. And so of course like the other stuff, I do like the artwork in this as well. So this whole chapter, like I said, is basically giving you stuff to be able to deal with like any and every type of adventure that you can come across, in like the whole different types of scenarios that you could quite possibly throw your characters into. So like you can see like it also, like I said, gets into like the weather. So it could be you could be running like a battle in like a forest, and it could be raining, or it could be dry, or it could be kind of foggy. So it gives you all these types of things to be able to handle any type of situation that will pop up through the plane. So like of course what's cool is like it gives you like a whole chapter on creating NPCs. So like it gives you like in a sense classes, like NPC classes. So your typical classes like fighters, wizards and like rogues. They're kind of like that in a sense. Kind of think of like the best of the best. Or like a fighter would be someone like be like the king's champion, whereas like a warrior right here would be maybe your typical city guard type of. The warrior would be someone who has training in like the martial arts with weapons and stuff, but that isn't necessarily as specialized as the fighter would be. So this is what like the NBC classes are. So it gives you classes that you can do with NBCs to help flesh out your non-player characters, as that's what they're called, even further. So, and of course, you also have to have a chapter on magic items as well. So, because who uh, who wouldn't want to have like magic, even if you're in like a low powered magical set, and sort of like Lord of the Rings, where magic does exist, but it's not up in your face and overbearing type of deal, as in like a lot of like your fantasy settings can be. So like but it does give you like ideas and stuff for like magical items that you can create as well. So like anything from your typical +1 long sword to maybe like a specific item, like maybe you have like a hero named Born or someone, and he had his armor is like an artifact, so you could create like an artifact like that type of deal. So it gives like a whole chapter on like magic items and like abilities and weapon and different like the types of like metals that you can, like the adamantine, think of like adamantium, like with Wolverine and his claws and skeleton. So this whole chapter goes on, and not just specific magic items like weapons and armor, but also like potions and scrolls, and like, it gives you a whole litany of different magical items that you can use through the whole adventure. So like for instance, like the rods are sort of like a spell cast, and like a little like metal poles that like wizards can hold like just in their like a hand, and kind of sit there and cast like extra spells type of deal. So like, and like I said, you got the rods, you got the scrolls, you got like staves, which are kind of like think of like Gandalf with his stick when he's walking into Rohan, his walking stick, as he calls it. So there's like any number of like different types of items that you could do, and you could even like in a sense like make mundane magical items too. So like it doesn't necessarily have to be like specific. So you could get creative. So a lot of things that aren't like necessarily like weapons or staves or armor or like rods or scrolls are also rings that can give you bonuses too. So like for instance, an extra bonus to attack, defense, or whatever with rings, and you could, in a sense, like I said, you could pretty much get like creative with the type of magic items that you could create that would be kind of unique to your campaign that you're running, and not just your stereotypical magical items that you find in here. So and this book is pretty much like all you would need for like a campaign into Pathfinder, which is like is pretty much like the biggest alternative to D&D. So like Paizo, who has created this, has been pretty successful with it. So this has pretty much become probably the most popular alternative to D&D. So like so they also have like another book, one called Starfinder, that I'll be getting to. So, and of course, in the back they do have your character sheet that you can like a photocopy. So when you're going way back to the first chapters, when you're creating characters, you can just, like I said, photocopy these and be able to like have sheets all ready for you, or you could go to your local gaming store and quite possibly see if they could just print off some character sheets for you while you're picking up something. Maybe you're picking up some dice or whatever to just be able to start. So what this does is like it gives you like the character sheet for it. So this is pretty much like the core rule book of Pathfinder. And like one thing that I just remembered that came to mind, someone put like a googly eyes on the dragon here and like Google you guys on here to kind of make it look kind of funny and everything. So that's one of the things that I came across like over the years. But like just like D&D, the core rule book, or in D&D's case, the player's handbook, is pretty much all you would need to run a campaign in it. So they do have like a lot of the expansions with rule books, and they also have like with the Pathfinder, they have the Game Master's Guide, which is the equivalent to the Dungeon Master's Guide of D&D. So that I'll probably be getting into eventually too. So next few weeks I might be getting into other ones as well, so to give people ideas on not just Pathfinder and D&D, but like last week when I went over Transformers, that you can see that there are like a litany of or many different types of role playing games that are out there. So this is the flip through of the core rulebook of Pathfinder, which is like pretty much the biggest alternative to D&D that's out there right now. So while I haven't played this yet, it runs like it looks it has the same kind of rules as third edition, which I played 15, 20 years ago. So if you're familiar with the D&D, then it would be relatively easy to get into this. If you first time player or DM that's just getting into it, it's relatively easy to get into it as well, because the system is kind of tends to be kind of streamlined, because the D20 system has been used for other games as well. So this is probably 15, 20 years ago. I did pick up a rule book for like the RPG based on the TV show Farscape, and it uses the same type of D20 system, and that's one of the ones that I'll be getting through pretty soon. So next week, like I said, I'll probably be getting into other ones. So until next week.